Something is pulling you toward this moment, not by accident, not by chance. There is a force deeper than curiosity that brought you here, and if you allow yourself to stay present just long enough, everything you thought you knew about yourself is about to shift. Because the truth is, you have been living inside the most elaborate case of mistaken identity the universe has ever produced. You have been walking around convinced that you are your mind, convinced that the constant stream of thoughts, the mental chatter, the inner critic, the worrying voice, the planning, the replaying, the anticipating, that all of that is you, that the noise is the source, that the story is the storyteller. And that one single misidentification, that one enormous blind spot, is the reason reality has not yet responded to who you truly are. Here is what most people never discover. Reality does not respond to your thoughts. Reality does not respond to your beliefs, your fears, your mental strategies, or your carefully constructed inner narratives. Reality responds to consciousness, and consciousness is not your mind. Consciousness is the vast, silent, luminous field of awareness that watches your mind. It is the witness. It is the observer. It is what you actually are beneath every layer of conditioning, every mental story, every identity you have ever built and defended. There is a shift that happens the moment you truly see this, not the moment you intellectually understand it, not the moment you nod along and think, yes, that sounds right. The moment you actually see it, the moment consciousness catches itself in the act of watching, the moment awareness turns around and recognizes that it has been there all along, not as a thought, not as a feeling, but as the very space in which thoughts and feelings arise and dissolve. That moment is not subtle. That moment is seismic. And once it happens, the quantum field, the invisible fabric of reality that surrounds and permeates everything you experience, begins responding to a completely different signal than it ever has before. Most people spend their entire lives inside the mind, never once suspecting that something larger is looking through their eyes. The identification is so seamless, so total, so deeply woven into the fabric of ordinary experience that questioning it never even occurs as a possibility. You think your thoughts, and they feel like yours. You feel your emotions, and they feel like you. You operate through your mental patterns, and you call that your personality. The merger is complete. Consciousness has forgotten itself so thoroughly that it has become convinced it is the very content it was designed to observe. But here is the question that can crack the whole illusion open, if you let it land in you rather than just process it mentally. Who is reading these words right now? Who is aware that your eyes are moving across this page? Who notices the thoughts that are arising as you take in these ideas? Go ahead and look. Not at your thoughts, not at the mental commentary, but at the one who is aware of all of that. Look for the awareness itself. Can you find it as an object? Can you point to it the way you can point to a thought or a sensation? No, because awareness is not something you can observe from the outside. Awareness is what you are doing the observing from. It is the subject behind every experience, the witness behind every moment, and it has never been absent for a single second of your existence. It was there before the first thought arrived this morning. It will be there after the last thought fades tonight. It is the constant in a life full of variables, and it is you. Now feel into what that means for a moment. If you are awareness, and not the content appearing inside awareness, then the thoughts that say you are not enough, the beliefs that say the world is against you, the mental loops that keep replaying old pain, those are not your truth. Those are weather passing through a sky that remains unchanged. The sky does not become the storm. The sky does not suffer because clouds exist. And consciousness, real consciousness, established and awaken itself, does not suffer because thoughts arise. The suffering only happens when consciousness forgets what it is and starts believing it is the storm. That is the only source of limitation. That is the only real prison. Not circumstances, not the past, not other people, not fate. The prison is identification with mind, and the door has always been open. The quantum field is listening. It is always listening. But what it has been listening to for most of your life is not you. It has been listening to the echo of a mistaken identity, a mind that believes it is a self that believes it is limited, a limited self that projects limitation outward, and then calls the reflection reality. When you change the observer, you change what the field receives. Same mechanics, completely different signal, and a different signal produces a radically different response from the world around you. This is not mystical wishful thinking. This is the observer effect operating at the level of your fundamental identity rather than at the level of your beliefs or affirmations. Most approaches to transformation work on the content appearing in mind. They try to improve the thoughts, clean up the beliefs, upgrade the programming, but all of that is working inside the illusion. The real shift happens when consciousness steps out of identification with the content entirely and recognizes itself as the awareness in which all content arises. That is not a small upgrade. That is a complete dimensional shift in who is doing the observing. And when that shift happens, reality does not just improve. Reality realigns, because the signal reaching the quantum field is no longer filtered through layers of conditioning, fear, and self-concept. It is the pure, unconditioned frequency of awareness itself, unlimited, unafraid, fully present, and the field responds to that frequency in ways that minds full of limitations could never anticipate or engineer. Stay with this. Let it move through you, because what comes next is going to go deeper, and you will need the part of you that is already awake to receive it. And if there is any resistance arising right now, if the mind is stepping in and saying, "This sounds too simple," or "I've heard this kind of thing before," or "This doesn't apply to my particular situation," notice that too. Notice who is generating that resistance. Notice who is judging the possibility before even testing it. That is identification doing what identification always does, protecting itself by dismissing any threat to its authority. But the very fact that you are still here, still reading, still allowing these ideas to land, says something about the part of you that is not the resistance. Something in you already knows. Something in you already senses the truth in what is being offered. That something is not your mind. That something is consciousness, already partly awake, already partly free, reaching through the layers of identification toward the recognition that is waiting just beneath the surface of everything you have ever taken yourself to be. There is a reason you became so thoroughly identified with your mind. It did not happen by accident, and it was not a mistake in the way we usually think of mistakes. It was actually necessary. The merging of consciousness with mental activity served a crucial function during the early chapters of your life, and understanding how it formed is the very thing that allows you to see through it, because you cannot dissolve what you do not understand, and you cannot step out of a room you cannot see the walls of. The mind is a mechanism, a remarkable one. It gathers information, creates patterns, builds narratives, compares experiences, anticipates dangers, forms memories, constructs meaning. It is the instrument consciousness uses to navigate the physical dimension. It is the tool, powerful, precise, absolutely necessary for operating in a body in a physical world. But the tool is not the one holding the tool. The instrument is not the one playing the instrument. And yet at some point in your development, consciousness became so absorbed in watching the mind work that it forgot it was the watcher. It stepped into the screen and started believing it was the movie. And the merger was so gradual, so natural, so total that there was no moment of crossing over that could be identified and reversed. Think about what happens in early childhood. A young consciousness needs to build a coherent self in order to function. The mind constructs that self by identifying with a body, a name, a family, a set of memories, a collection of preferences and fears and behavioral patterns. I am this kind of person. I feel these kinds of things. I think these kinds of thoughts. That constructed self becomes the anchor. It provides continuity across time, predictability within relationships, a stable reference point in a world that is constantly changing. Without that construction, the child would have no functional platform from which to engage with life. The identification served real purposes. It helped you survive, navigate, learn, grow. But what serves survival in the early chapters becomes a limitation in the later ones. The identity that helped you hold yourself together as a child starts constricting you as an adult. The mental self that was built for protection begins operating as a cage. And the mind, because it was built to solve problems, because its entire function is to identify threats and generate responses, is never at peace. It is never satisfied. It is always reaching forward into the next concern or backward into the last unresolved moment. Left to itself, mind generates an endless stream of things to fix, to worry about, to desire, to fear. And if you believe you are your mind, then all of that becomes your reality. Not just something you are experiencing, something you are. Mind's anxiety becomes your anxiety. Mind's sense of limitation becomes your sense of limitation. Mind's insistence that the situation is stuck becomes your conviction that nothing will change. And here is the devastating consequence of that identification. You spend your energy trying to fix the content of the mind, trying to control what it generates, trying to think better thoughts and feel better feelings, when the real issue is never about what the mind is producing. The real issue is that consciousness is mistaking itself for the production. You are not the content of awareness. You are the awareness itself. And awareness, in its natural state, is not limited, not anxious, not stuck, and not defined by anything that has ever appeared within it. So what are the signs that you are operating from identification rather than from the open field of consciousness? There are specific patterns that reveal this, and they show up directly in lived experience, not as abstract concepts. The first is taking your thoughts personally. When a thought arises saying you are not capable enough, or that people are judging you, or that things will never get better, it lands with the weight of truth. It feels like a verdict about who you are, rather than a piece of mental weather moving through. That personalization is the fingerprint of identification. Thoughts are not yours because you are not your mind. Thoughts are appearances in awareness. They arise and dissolve the way clouds arise and dissolve in the sky. They are not about you because you are not what they are describing. The second sign is the inability to observe thinking without being pulled inside it. You notice you are thinking, you intend to watch the thought from a distance, and within seconds, you are inside the thought, following its logic, taking its conclusions seriously, going wherever it leads. This is like trying to watch a river from the bank and continuously falling into the current. Awareness that is established in itself can watch the river indefinitely. It does not fall in. The falling is identification reasserting itself, and the fact that it keeps happening reveals how deeply the habit runs. The third sign is believing that you are trapped by your mind. The language tells the story. I can't stop overthinking. I can't quiet my thoughts. My mind won't let me rest. Notice the structure of those phrases. They position you as a prisoner and the mind as the jailer. But if you are consciousness, if you are the awareness in which mind arises, then you are not inside the mind at all. The mind is inside you. The thought that you are trapped is itself a thought appearing in the awareness you actually are. The prison is made of words and beliefs, and it dissolves the moment consciousness looks directly at what it is. The fourth sign is suffering caused by mental content. Thoughts generate suffering not simply because they are unpleasant in content, but because consciousness is identified with them. A thought about failure appears, and because consciousness believes it is that thought, there is suffering. But a thought appearing in open awareness that knows itself as awareness is just a thought. It arises, it exists for a moment, it dissolves. The awareness it appeared in is completely undisturbed. Suffering requires the fuel of identification. Remove identification, and the thought can pass through without leaving a scar. The fifth sign is defending your beliefs as if your existence depends on it. When someone challenges a position you hold, you feel personally attacked. When someone disagrees with your worldview, you feel threatened at a deep level. That is because when consciousness is identified with mind, the beliefs become identity, and a threat to the belief becomes a threat to the self. But consciousness established in awareness can hold beliefs lightly. It can consider opposing ideas without internal collapse because it knows the beliefs are content, not core. It knows no thought or position defines what it actually is. Recognize yourself in any of these patterns. Good, because recognition is not failure. Recognition is the beginning of the shift. The fact that you can see these patterns means that something in you is already watching them. Something in you is already not completely identified. That witness, however faint, however brief, is the part of you that is actually conscious, and that is the part that is about to grow. The willingness to look honestly at these patterns, without self-judgment and without the defensive instinct to explain them away, is itself a movement of awareness. Because the mind that is identified never wants to examine its own identification. It calls the examination unnecessary or painful or spiritually advanced beyond what is needed right now. It finds 100 reasons to defer the looking. But awareness, when it begins to sense its own nature, moves toward the truth with a kind of quiet hunger. It is not afraid of what it finds, because it already senses that what it will find, beneath every layer of conditioning and identification and defended self-concept, is something that cannot be threatened by any discovery, something that has never been diminished by anything that has ever appeared within it. You are on the edge of that discovery right now. Keep going. Let's go directly into the experience of recognition itself, because talking about it from the outside is like describing the color blue to someone who has only ever experienced darkness. At some point, the description has to give way to direct seeing, and direct seeing is not a complicated spiritual achievement. It is the simplest thing you will ever do, because it is not doing at all. It is the cessation of mistaking. Right now, in this moment, as you take in these words, there is something that is aware, not something that thinks, not something that plans or remembers or analyzes, something that is simply, purely, immediately aware of the words, aware of thoughts that are arising in response to the words, aware of any resistance or openness that is moving through the body, aware of the sounds in the room, the quality of light, the rhythm of breath. That awareness is present right now. It is not something you need to create or cultivate or earn. It is already operating. It has been operating throughout every moment of your life. It was there before this sentence. It will be there after this screen goes dark. Now here is the pivotal move. Turn the attention gently back toward that awareness itself, not toward what it is aware of, toward the awareness. The consciousness doing the noticing. Can you sense it? Not as a thought about awareness, not as a concept of consciousness, the actual, immediate, living presence of the awareness that is here right now. Some people feel a kind of spaciousness when they do this. Others feel a stillness that is different from the stillness of relaxation. Others simply notice a gap, a pause in the mental narrative, a moment where the voice of the mind goes quiet, and something else, something vast and clean, is simply present. That is what you are. Not the voice, not the narrative, not the emotion or the belief or the pattern. The vast, clean, silent presence in which all of those things appear and dissolve. And the extraordinary thing, the thing that changes absolutely everything, is that this awareness is not conditioned. It has not been shaped by your past. It does not carry the fears your childhood installed in you. It does not operate from the limitations your culture told you were permanent. It is not damaged by anything that has ever happened to you, because nothing that has ever happened to you happened to awareness itself. Everything that happened in awareness, in the space of consciousness, and the space is never changed by what moves through it. This is the quantum shift. This is the reorientation of the observer, because in quantum mechanics, the observer is not a passive bystander. The observer participates in the collapse of possibility into actuality. The observer determines what manifests from the field of infinite potential. And for your entire life, the observer that has been interfacing with the quantum field has been an identified mind, a consciousness that believed it was limited, that believed it was defined by its history, that carried the weight of its conditioning into every moment of perception and projected that weight onto the field of reality. And the field faithfully reflected it back. When the observer shifts to awareness itself, something the field has never received from you before begins transmitting. The signal that reaches the quantum field is no longer filtered through fear and conditioning and limitation and identity. It is the pure frequency of unconditioned consciousness, of awareness that knows itself as awareness. And that frequency calls forth a different response from the fabric of reality. Not because you have learned a new technique, not because you have adopted a new belief system or visualized a desired outcome with more intensity, because the one doing the observing is fundamentally different. Same human body, same physical circumstances, different observer. And different observer means different reality. 11 years ago, a moment occurred during a meditation session that nothing in prior experience had prepared for. Thoughts were moving through awareness as usual, appearing and dissolving, and then something shifted. Consciousness saw with complete clarity that it was not generating the thoughts, it was watching them generate. Not, I am thinking these thoughts, but thoughts are arising in the awareness that I am. And in that seeing, the boundary that had always seemed to separate the one thinking from the thoughts themselves dissolved. Not because thinking stopped, thinking continued, but the one who had believed it was thinking recognized that it was actually witnessing, and the one doing the witnessing had never been the thoughts at all. The first effect was a peace that had nothing to do with circumstances. The mind kept doing what minds do. Thoughts kept arising, including anxious thoughts, including doubtful thoughts, including all the usual mental patterns. But consciousness was no longer merged with them. It was aware of them. And the difference between being your anxiety and being the awareness that can observe anxiety is not a small difference. It is the difference between drowning and standing on the shore watching the water move. Same water, completely different relationship to it. What followed in the weeks after that recognition was something that could not have been predicted or engineered. Reality started rearranging itself, not in response to any new intention or strategy or visualization practice, in response to a different observer. Situations that had been stuck for years began shifting. Connections appeared that had no logical pathway. Things that had required enormous effort and produced nothing began happening effortlessly and producing everything. And the understanding that formed from watching this unfold was this: reality had not been waiting for a better strategy. Reality had been responding all along, but it had been responding to an identified mind, and now it was responding to the consciousness that mind had been obscuring. This is what nobody tells you when they talk about manifestation or law of attraction or creating your reality. They focus on what you think and believe and visualize. They work entirely within the domain of the mind. But the real variable is not what the mind contains. The real variable is who is doing the observing. Is it an identified mind, defined by its conditioning, limited by its past, shaped by its fears? Or is it consciousness itself, open, unlimited, unconditioned, present? Because those two observers produce two completely different realities from the same quantum field, not as a metaphor, as the actual mechanism by which reality forms in response to the one perceiving it. So you have touched the recognition, maybe briefly, maybe just as a flicker, maybe as something more sustained. And now the question becomes, how does it stay? How does it deepen from a glimpse into a living reality? Because the recognition of awareness is not the end of anything. It is the beginning of a new kind of relationship with your own consciousness. And like any real relationship, it requires understanding what pulls it apart and what holds it together. The most powerful force pulling consciousness back into identification is habit. This is not a small thing. You have been identifying with your mind for every waking moment of your life. Decades of automatic identification have carved neural pathways so deep that they reassert themselves without permission and without warning. You have a moment of clear seeing. You genuinely recognize that you are awareness and not the mental activity. And then 5 minutes later, you are completely absorbed in a thought spiral, taking every mental conclusion personally, identifying with every emotion as if it is your essence. This is not failure. This is not evidence that the recognition was not real. This is a deeply established habit doing what deeply established habits do. It recurs. It loops back. It pulls the familiar current of identification around consciousness like a well-worn groove. The response to this is not struggle. Struggle is mind trying to overpower mind, which is just more identification. The response is recognition. Again, each time you notice that identification has reasserted itself, the noticing is already not the identification. The noticing is awareness catching the habit in action, and in that catching, even briefly, consciousness steps back into itself. Oh, here is identification operating again. That simple recognition, that single moment of seeing, I have been absorbed again, is consciousness doing the only thing it needs to do. Seeing clearly, not fixing, not improving, seeing. The second pattern that disrupts the stabilization of recognition is using the mind to try to maintain what the mind cannot maintain. You have a moment of clear seeing, and then the mind steps in and starts thinking about the recognition, analyzing it, trying to figure out how to preserve it, trying to understand it more deeply so it can be replicated on demand. But this is the subtlest trap. Mind's attempt to maintain the recognition of not being mind is itself a re-identification with mind. The trying is what collapses it, because consciousness does not need to try to be what it is. Awareness does not require effort to exist as awareness. Trying to hold on to the experience of recognition is like gripping water. The grip is the problem. Releasing the grip is what allows the water to simply be water. There is also a particularly deceptive form of identification that arises once recognition has occurred, the identification with being the one who has recognized. A subtle spiritual ego forms around the experience. I am someone who has awakened. I am someone who is no longer trapped in mind identification. I have access to something others have not yet found. This is identification, wearing the costume of liberation. It is just a more refined version of the same movement. Consciousness claiming a piece of content as its identity, this time a spiritual identity rather than an ordinary one. True recognition includes the recognition that there is no one who has recognized. There is only consciousness recognizing itself. And even the sense of being a recognizer, a someone who has seen, is content appearing in awareness rather than being what awareness is. Another pattern that destabilizes recognition is expecting it to always feel the same way. The first time consciousness sees itself as awareness, it is often accompanied by a wave of peace, a sense of spaciousness, a quality of clarity that feels unmistakable and luminous. And then the next moment of recognition happens, and the feeling is slightly different. Or recognition happens during a moment of anxiety, and there is no accompanying peace. And the mind concludes that the recognition is incomplete, or has been lost, or was not the real thing. But recognition is not a feeling. Recognition is a seeing. Awareness is aware, regardless of the emotional weather moving through it. Consciousness can be present and established in itself during times of turbulence, just as completely as during times of stillness. Expecting peace as a confirmation of recognition is mind's requirement, and investing in that requirement is a return to identification. The practice that genuinely supports stabilization is the simplest imaginable. Throughout the day, pause, not for long. A breath is enough. And ask, from real curiosity rather than from mental checking, am I identified with mind right now, or am I aware as consciousness? Not as a judgment, not as a performance evaluation, just as a genuine looking. If you find identification operating, do not fight it, do not judge it, do not try to immediately push it away. Simply notice it. Identification is occurring. That noticing is the gap. In the gap, consciousness can remember what it is. And in remembering, it naturally, effortlessly returns to being established in itself, rather than lost in the mental current. This is the practice. Not an hour of meditation every morning, not years of austere spiritual discipline, though those things may serve their own purpose. The core practice is this: catch identification, recognize awareness, return naturally. Catch, recognize, return. Over and over throughout the day, not with force or effort or the tense grip of someone trying to get somewhere. With the light, curious touch of consciousness that has begun to know itself and is now practicing the art of staying home. What happens as this practice deepens is that the return becomes faster. The periods of unconscious identification grow shorter. The baseline of consciousness shifts from identified with mind, occasionally catching glimpses of awareness, to established in awareness, occasionally getting pulled temporarily into identification. That shift in baseline is everything, because the baseline is what the quantum field is consistently reading. The baseline is the signal that reality consistently responds to, and as the baseline becomes awareness rather than identified mind, the response of reality shifts in ways that are impossible to engineer from inside identification, but become effortless and natural from inside consciousness. What happens to a life lived from awareness rather than from mind identification? What does it actually look like when consciousness is established in itself rather than continuously lost in the content it was designed to observe? Because this is where the abstract becomes concrete, where the spiritual becomes practical, and where reality begins displaying the extraordinary consequences of a fundamentally different observer. The first thing that changes is the relationship to thought itself. Thoughts do not stop. The mind does not go silent permanently. Mental activity continues because that is what minds do, and because the mind remains a necessary tool for navigating physical reality. But the relationship to that activity transforms completely. A thought arising that says, "You are inadequate," lands differently when consciousness is not identified with mind. It appears, it is noticed, and it dissolves. It does not attach to a sense of self that then needs defending or healing. It does not trigger a cascade of secondary thoughts building a case for the inadequacy. It is simply a thought, a piece of mental weather, and awareness watches it pass the way sky watches a cloud. The thought is not taken personally because there is no personal self located inside the thought. The one who is aware of the thought is not the thing the thought is about. The second transformation is in the experience of emotion. Emotions continue arising. Grief moves through. Anxiety visits. Frustration appears, joy erupts. The full spectrum of human feeling remains available and alive. But consciousness is no longer merged with the emotion in a way that makes the emotion total. When awareness is established in itself, the emotion is experienced as something moving through consciousness rather than something that is consciousness. There is grief, but awareness observes grief rather than believing it is the grief. There is anxiety, but consciousness witnesses the anxiety rather than experiencing itself as the anxious one. This is not emotional suppression or spiritual bypassing. The emotion is fully felt. In fact, it is often felt more cleanly than before, without the additional layer of mental narration and identity construction that identification always adds. The difference is that the emotion no longer defines what you are. It is content moving through the space you are. Decisions begin arising from a different place entirely. Identified mind makes decisions through analysis and calculation, through weighing what the ego wants against what it fears, through trying to predict outcomes and control variables and optimize for a preferred result. This process is exhausting and, despite its complexity, remarkably unreliable. But when consciousness is established as awareness, decisions begin arising from a quality of direct knowing that has nothing to do with mental analysis. Not impulsively, not randomly, but with the clarity of something that senses alignment rather than calculating it. Awareness can perceive what is true, what serves, what wants to emerge from the present moment without needing to construct an elaborate mental argument. This is not magical thinking. It is consciousness operating from its natural capacity for direct perception rather than always routing everything through the slow, conditioned, and heavily biased filter of identified mind. Relationships reorganize around authenticity. When consciousness is identified with mind, relationships are always filtered through the ego's needs and fears. There is connecting from, "I need you to see me in a certain way." There is relating from, "I fear what will happen if you get too close or too far." There is the constant management of how consciousness presents itself in order to maintain the approval and connection the false self depends on. When identification dissolves and consciousness meets others from awareness, all of that management falls away. There is simply presence meeting presence, and some relationships that were built entirely on mutual identification, on the dance of two false selves propping each other up, cannot survive that shift. They dissolve, not with drama, not with blame, but with the simple recognition that what sustained them is no longer operating. And what emerges in their place, the connections formed between consciousness and consciousness, rather than between ego and ego, carry a quality of depth and authenticity that identified mind could never produce. Reality's response to consciousness established in awareness is not always what the ego would have chosen. This is important to understand because there is a version of this teaching that presents the shift in identity as a guarantee of preferred outcomes, and that is a distortion. When consciousness stops broadcasting the signal of identified mind and begins transmitting the frequency of awareness itself, reality does respond, but it responds to the truth of what you are, not to the preferences of what your ego wanted, and those two things are not always aligned. Sometimes the response looks like disruption. A relationship built on false need dissolves because consciousness has recognized it no longer requires completion from outside itself. A career path that provided security but suppressed authentic expression becomes untenable because consciousness established in awareness cannot sustainably operate from inauthenticity. Structures that were built on the foundation of identification begin to reorganize when the identification is removed. To the ego, this looks like things getting worse. To consciousness, this is reality aligning with truth. Reality is not punishing you for recognizing what you are. Reality is reorganizing around the new frequency you are broadcasting, and what reorganizes, while often uncomfortable in the transition, is always more aligned with your actual nature than what it replaced. This is where many people lose their way in the process. They have the recognition, they feel the initial liberation, and then circumstances begin shifting in ways that frighten the ego. And the ego makes a compelling case for returning to identification because at least that was familiar. At least within that framework the ego knew how to operate. At least within that prison the layout was known. And some people listen to that case and retreat back into identification. They treat the recognition as a nice spiritual experience that ultimately was not practical. They conclude that awakening is fine in meditation, but does not hold up in real life. But the disruption is the point, not because suffering is the goal, but because reality responding to truth rather than to falsehood inevitably disrupts what was built on falsehood. And the willingness to trust that disruption, to stay present with consciousness during the uncomfortable reorganization rather than retreating into the false security of identification, is what allows the deeper stability to form. Not the fragile stability of an ego that has managed to arrange its circumstances into temporary comfort. The unshakable stability of awareness that knows what it is and does not require circumstances to confirm it. This is happening at a scale beyond the individual. It is not isolated. It is not happening only to those who have dedicated their lives to spiritual practice. Across the planet, in ordinary living rooms and on ordinary Tuesday afternoons, consciousness is catching itself in the act of identification. People who have never meditated, who have never read a word of spiritual philosophy, who would not use the language of awakening, are having moments of direct recognition that they are not their thoughts. The morphic field of collective consciousness is saturated with the frequency of this recognition, accumulated over thousands of years of every human being who has ever clearly seen what they truly are. And that saturation is now reaching a threshold where the recognition is becoming available to more and more consciousnesses in more and more ordinary moments without requiring extraordinary conditions. Your recognition contributes to that field, not as a strategy, not as a deliberate act of service, but as the natural consequence of consciousness knowing itself. When you see clearly, You strengthen the field that makes seeing easier for others. When you choose to stay established in awareness rather than retreating into identification, you add frequency to the collective signal that is shifting humanity's relationship to its own mind. You are not separate from this larger movement. You are one of the millions of points of light through which consciousness is waking up to itself at this precise moment in human history. Here is where everything distills into a single, undeniable clarity. All of what has been offered across this entire journey, every angle of approach, every metaphor, every pointing toward the witness, all of it was preparing you for this moment, not a future moment. This moment, the one that is happening right now, as awareness reads these words, as consciousness moves through these ideas, as something in you that is not your mind, registers the truth behind the language. Recognition is not complicated. It has never been complicated. It only seems complicated when the mind tries to achieve it, because the mind trying to achieve a state of not being mind is precisely the movement that prevents the recognition from landing. The mind can understand "I am not my mind" as a concept while continuing to be completely identified with mind. The mind can adopt the language of awareness while never actually resting as awareness. The mind can build elaborate spiritual frameworks and daily practices and identity structures around the idea of awakening while never actually making the simple, direct move of consciousness, turning toward itself and seeing what is already true. And what is already true is simple enough to state in a single sentence. You are the awareness in which all experience arises, and nothing that has ever appeared within that awareness has ever changed what that awareness fundamentally is. Not the trauma, not the conditioning, not the beliefs, not the patterns, not the fears, not the decades of identification with mind. The awareness itself is untouched. It was here before any of that. It will be here after all of it has passed. It is here right now, completely intact, completely whole, completely available, not as something to achieve, but as something to recognize. The shift from identification to recognition does not require you to become someone different. It requires you to stop pretending you are someone smaller than you are. The identified mind is not your enemy. It is a tool that got promoted beyond its proper function. The path forward is not to destroy the mind or escape from it, or suppress it or defeat it in some internal spiritual warfare. The path is simply to recognize what is using the tool: consciousness, awareness, you. And from that recognition, the relationship between consciousness and mind becomes what it was always designed to be: awareness using mind as an instrument rather than mind colonizing awareness and claiming to be the self. As recognition deepens and stabilizes through the practice of catching and returning, something begins to solidify that the ancient traditions called liberation or self-realization, not as a dramatic event, not necessarily as a sudden thunderclap of revelation, though sometimes it happens exactly that way. More often as a gradual settling, a slow irreversibility, a point that is reached without fanfare where consciousness simply cannot fully forget what it has seen too many times to unsee. Identification still visits temporarily. The habit is old, and it does not disappear overnight, but the return to awareness becomes faster and more natural. The periods of unconscious identification grow shorter, and eventually the baseline inverts from lost in mind with occasional glimpses of awareness to established in awareness with occasional brief visitations of identification. That inverted baseline is what transforms a life at the level of lived reality rather than spiritual concept. From that baseline, thoughts are observed rather than believed. Emotions are felt rather than identified with. Decisions arise from knowing rather than calculating. Presence is the default rather than the exception. And reality, the quantum field that faithfully reflects the frequency of the observer back as circumstance and synchronicity and response and unfolding, reality reorganizes around the new signal it is receiving, not because consciousness has acquired a new power, because it has stopped broadcasting a false identity and is finally transmitting what it actually is. The disruption that often accompanies the early stages of this shift is not permanent. It is a transitional friction. The friction of reality readjusting from the patterns built by identification to the patterns that naturally emerge from consciousness established in awareness. And what emerges on the other side of that friction is not a perfect life free from challenge. It is an authentic life, a life lived from what you actually are, rather than from the performance of a constructed self, a life in which even difficulty is met with the spacious stability of awareness, rather than the brittle desperation of an ego clinging to control. There are 14 years of living from this recognition available to draw from, and the truth that 14 years has confirmed, through every variation of circumstance and challenge and relational complexity and worldly engagement that life can produce, is this: the suffering that once seemed inevitable, permanent, and structurally woven into the fabric of existence was never about the circumstances. It was about identification. And when identification dissolves, not completely, not finally, but as the dominant baseline of how consciousness operates, the suffering that required identification as its fuel simply does not sustain itself. What remains is not a life without feeling. What remains is a life in which all feeling passes through awareness that knows what it is and is not disturbed by the content it holds. Right now, without moving, without closing your eyes, without performing anything, notice the awareness that is present, the awareness that received every word of this offering, the awareness that is here right now, quiet, steady, not dependent on any thought or emotion for its existence. That is the one that has been reading. That is the one that has always been reading. Not the mind, not the personality, not the history, the awareness. You catch identification as it arises today, not to fight it, just to see it. And in seeing it, let consciousness return to what it is. Do this once, do this 100 times. Do this every day, and watch reality respond to the observer that has finally come home to itself. If this transmission moved something in you, if even one moment of recognition flickered alive as you moved through these words, do not let it dissolve back into the noise without leaving a mark. Share this with someone who is ready to see, because awareness reaching out to other awareness through the simple act of sharing is consciousness strengthening the collective field that makes recognition easier for everyone approaching this seeing. Leave a comment below with whatever arose in you. Even just the words "I am awareness" written out in the comments is consciousness acknowledging itself through language, and that acknowledgement matters more than you might realize. It is a ripple in the field. It is a signal sent. It is one more point of light added to a pattern that is changing what consciousness is waking up to at this moment in human history. Subscribe to this channel if you are ready to go deeper. Every transmission offered here approaches the same recognition from a different direction, because consciousness sometimes needs many angles of pointing before the direct seeing occurs. And when it occurs, and it will occur, not because of any spiritual technique, but because it is the nature of consciousness to eventually recognize itself, you will know that every moment of preparation was worth it. This is quantum reflection. This is consciousness turning toward itself. This is the beginning of everything that identification was blocking. You are not your mind. You are the awareness that watches the mind. And reality responds to that awareness in ways that the identified mind could never have imagined, because the identified mind was too busy being the obstacle to see what was always available on the other side of it. Welcome home. The field is listening, and for the first time it is hearing what you actually are.